to another episode of TechC Turbo. My name is Frank Gullo, and I am your host. On this episode, we're joined by Ankur Sheth, who has spent 25 years at the intersection of cybersecurity strategy, risk management, and enterprise transformation, advising CISOs, risk officers, and boards across North America, Europe, the Middle East, and APAC. He has seen the threat landscape evolve from a technical discipline into a boardroom priority, and now leads both cybersecurity and AI risk advisory at FTI Consulting. Ankur, thank you so much for being here. Glad to have you on the program. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Frank.
Absolutely. Very hot topic, AI and security. So we're going to ask a lot of questions about that. So you spent over 20 years in cybersecurity, starting at PwC, building out a global advisory practice, and now stepping into a new chapter at FTI Consulting. That's a career arc that spans the entire modern history of cyber as a discipline. How did you find your way into this field, and how has the nature of the work changed from where you started to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks. And it's an interesting story. And firstly, just want to say thanks for having me and hope everyone finds this, helpful and valuable. I didn't know I was going to be in cyber when I first started because I have been in cyber since I graduated from college. I was actually at Penn State, and I know we're going to talk about that later. But they had created a new major that was actually targeting security as one aspect of consulting, but more consulting more broadly. So when I joined PwC, they threw me in a cyber practice, a sub practice called identity management, which I didn't know anything about at the time. Now it's the center of security, identity management, and kind of started from there and grew from there. So it's been an interesting journey because I kind of started out specialized, right, in identity management, as I mentioned, but then have become more general as I kind of grew through the ranks and now kind of running my own practice, my own team. So it's interesting, but I really kind of fell into it, I guess. But I will say it's been a very happy career choice. I don't think I'm really worried about job security in this field. So it's been great over the past 20, 25 years now.
A good career to fall into. So you advise CISOs, company officers, boards, the people at companies ultimately responsible when things go wrong. In your experience, what's the biggest gap you see between how orgs think they're managing cyber and risk and how they actually are doing it?
Yeah, I think has been a constant theme throughout my entire kind of tenure in this field, right? The disconnect with boards or even certain levels of executive management down to the teams are actually, hands-on keyboard doing the work, right? And the biggest disconnect is, the perceived security posture, right? What some people think they have, what is actually happening. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is, and we've seen this evolve a little bit, but, a lot of organizations, conflate compliance with security, right? Because I'm a regulated industry, financial services, healthcare, whatever, right? And I have to do these certain things. That means I'm secure, but that's not the case. I don't think any, cyber professional will say that, right? Security goes beyond compliance. So a lot of executives think, oh, I've been compliant with HIPAA as an example, so I know that has security stuff in it, so I'm good, right? Not the case, right? The second thing, I'll mention three things, is visibility, right? A lot of the organizations we tend to work with have never done, an assessment. So they don't know what they don't know, right? Having a more holistic view of all the things that you're doing and not doing, and then making, updates and changes to that as you go forward is really important. A lot of people are just reacting, right? I had an event, I had an incident, someone got into my network through XYZ. Now let me fix that, right? And they move on in more a Band-Aid kind of format, right? And that really is more of a technical thing versus thinking of it more holistically at the board level, right? And then lastly, which kind of ties this all together, I think, is also technology, right? I can't tell you how many times I've had clients say, "Oh yeah, I purchased the best EDR product," as an example, so I'm covered, right? And that's not the case, right? We all know technology is not a silver bullet, right? You have to build technology into the program around processes, governance, policies, things like that, right? If you have a technology and you purchase it, but you don't actually implement it properly or tune it properly, right? Especially in the security world, that's not helpful, right? So a lot of people just think, oh, I purchased something, I'm good to go. And that's really not the case. And I see that a lot at the executive. Like, oh, I have these good tools. I spend $1 million on tools, but it's not actually implemented properly. When you talk to the technical people, that's a gap, right? So, I think many times, the boards and executive teams think, yeah, cyber's a project. Let me implement this or implement that, and I'm good to go. But as we all know, especially those that have been in the field for a long time, it's much more than that, right? It's a program. It's constantly evolving. The threats are changing, and we need to think about it that way, right? So how do we constantly enhance and improve our program versus implementing point solutions? And that's the gap that we try to bridge, I think, every day with education, right? Is helping educate executives, helping educate boards on how to think about this risk. And I think that will help, lessen that gap.
Well, that great elaboration. And I hear a lot also cost. Either, as you say, some firms, they can invest so much that they feel that's all they have to do. But other firms will operate from a scarcity mindset. And I think, as you bring up, security is more than, right, the products you're buying. So your playbook, right, in that sense, for really making people take it seriously, going beyond the products. You mentioned training. Like how else do you really help them really see the importance of it?
Yeah, no, and that is there's no one answer for that because obviously we're dealing with people and everyone thinks differently and wants to, manage their organizations differently. But at a high level, I think it's especially when we're thinking about boards, it's how do we translate what we're doing on the ground in cyber into their language, right? And for boards, that language is risk, right? They think about enterprise risk, financial risk, right, to the organization. And this is another type of risk, right? Cyber risk they need to be thinking about. In a good way, right? You can look at all these different, analyst reports and surveys that come out, and boards and executives are always having cyber's, top 3 or 5 in terms of the risks that they're thinking about and managing now, right? So at least it's at that level now. And how we translate it, I think, right, from a risk perspective, but then even more so if we go a level deeper, is honestly, to a quantitative measure, right? So if we say, hey, ransomwares are costing, the IBM report said 4 million in the last report, right? On average, we want to reduce that risk. We can't have that hit, in our company, right? So how do we actually bring that risk down, mitigate that risk, transfer that risk through insurance, whatever it might be, right? So how do we bring to their language is really thinking about what makes sense to them, right? And how they think about the organization, how they run the organization. That's really risk and financial.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I participate in our company's annual SOC audit, so I work closely with finance, and a risk register is a part of that. And since we're talking about risk, so you're leading not just cyber advisory, but specifically AI risk.
Yeah.
And as my understanding, that's a relatively new practice area. So when you're talking about that in quantification, what does AI risk mean as an advisory discipline, nowadays, as the field is developing as we speak day by day? And how is it different from traditional cybersecurity risk, as you'd call it,
Yeah.
more traditional?
Yeah, I think of AI risk and any other risk. I mean, we could talk about quantum too down the road, right? It's a new type of technology risk, right? And technology risk has always been around for a long time. But as we develop and implement new technologies, we have to think about how that technology affects, what we do, our systems, our processes, our people, right? And of course, AI risk brings a whole different type of risk, right? If you think about cyber, we're always thinking about what if someone breaks into the network or the system and gets access to information and data, right? We have to manage to that risk. AI is a little bit different in my head, right? It's not about someone breaking in. That can still happen. Someone can break into an AI system, but that still exists. But it's also when an AI system, what if that system causes harm or fails or breaks in a way that we haven't anticipated, right? So you think about things like, bias, right? That we talk about a lot. We think about, model failures, right? That's a whole nother type of risk that, under the bucket of technology risk, we haven't really had to build for or think about in the past. So now we're seeing, from an AI risk advisory perspective, is how are we building governance around that? How are we building testing around that? And other processes to actually manage and mitigate that risk to the best of our abilities, right? So it has shifted, at least for me, and I think for probably most people, in terms of our traditional cyber quote unquote work that we do into a new, a new world of okay, we also have to think about this other thing over here that we've never actually done before, right? And I think to your point, as you mentioned, we're also figuring it out, right? I don't think anyone can say they're perfect at it or have it all squared away. And I think every day we're evolving what we do in terms of how we help our clients think about managing this risk. But for good or for bad, there's new frameworks coming out every day, new regulations, right, across the world, not just in the U.S., that are helping kind of frame this problem for us. And I think kind of bringing that all together is how we think about actually addressing it with our clients and just more broadly.
That makes sense. It does. Um, that said, uh, you mentioned, I think in the answer you said across people, process, and technology, and talk to most security, and we'll hear that the weakest link is often the human, right? Social engineering.
Yeah.
So as AI is really involved in more sophisticated attacks, nation states, personalized, how do you think the human layer is going to hold up to this?
Yeah, this is the tough part. um, you can, as you rightfully mentioned, right? Every article we read, every analyst report we read, right, says the human factor is the greatest vulnerability, and it's not wrong because that is the way the most common way bad actors get in to our environments, to our homes, whatever it might be, right? But I don't think we can just keep blaming the human element, right? We're in really an environment that's designed to deceive us, to deceive ourselves, to deceive humans, right? Especially with AI attacks, right? I mean, you think about a system, you know how a system works, it follows a certain path, right? And you're trying to break that path or go around that path. But humans don't have a single path of thinking, right? There's, we all think differently, how we react to events, how we react to different things. So, having the human element is of course going to be harder to protect against because everyone's going to be different. It's not a single path. And now with AI attacks, it's even more amplified, right? The easiest example, which I'm sure people have heard about before, is phishing, right? In the past, I mean 2 years ago, I guess 18 months ago, right? Phishing emails were easy to identify, right? There's misspellings in it, the grammar was off, things like that. But now you can run a phishing email through an AI tool, and have it build something that looks perfectly correct for English or for German or for whatever target you have, and it's really hard to discern them now, right? So AI has changed a lot of the human element component in terms of what we can quickly and easily discern from a fraud email from a regular email to much more harder from that aspect. And I think we're all still figuring that out, right? Again, some of these phishing emails can get through phishing tools now because they look real and things like that. So that's not it's not an easy answer. Better training, which you mentioned, of course, is super important, right? We want to make sure we're doing continuous training with AI, but we have to assume people are going to make mistakes, right? And that's okay. I don't think that's a bad thing. No one's perfect, right? So when we think about that, we think about layered defense, right? So not just having a tool to capture phishing emails, but do you have other defenses in place so that if I do click on something or I download something, it can still get stopped, right? And we've been talking about layered defense, for 15 years. That's not new, but I think it is more amplified in today's current context because of how AI can easily or more easily manipulate, the human elements. And I think part of that, and then I'll stop rambling, but the culture of security has to still change, right? I think a lot of people think of security as a checkbox, do my training, be done. But I think organizations need to really build security into the culture, right? A good example is if I do something wrong, am I afraid to report it, right? A lot of people may say, yeah, I don't want to report that. I'm going to try and do it on my own, right? Because I don't want to get yelled at or potentially get fired. But it's not about that, right? It's not about blame. We want everyone to report and feel comfortable reporting if they did something wrong or think something looks off, as part of that broader security culture. So a lot of things said there, but yeah, I mean, it has changed a lot of what we're doing. And I think it amplified certain things like layer defense training, things of that nature.
No, great stuff. And I think the layered approach always has made sense and continues to. I think it is worth pointing out, though, you'd mentioned some of these defenses are tech, that AI is being used for good. My Microsoft Patch Tuesday has never looked so inflated as it has in years.
Yeah.
So I think both sides, while attackers are using it to really scale and personalize threats, defenders are embedding it into detection response tools.
Yeah.
So from where you sit advising, which side is winning right now? Is this kind of a constant back and forth, or are you seeing the companies at scale, these security companies, begin to now build in some of the functionality themselves?
Yeah, I mean, winning is a hard one, but I will say, right, the bad actors, those that are using not just AI, but any tool, right, are always trying to be innovative and find new ways to get by the defenses that we built, right? And obviously, the digital world, we're talking about technology and things like that, right? And we've heard this line in movies and all over the place, right? But it only takes the attackers they only have to get it right once, and we have to get it right 100% of the time, right? And that's hard, right? Because they're always again trying to be more innovative and thinking of new ways. So AI, as we tie it back to that, has really democratized attacks, right? It's so much easier, like I said, to create phishing campaigns, to create deep fakes, right? We've heard about a variety of examples where deep fakes have been used to trick people into making payments and things like that. So I wouldn't say they're winning, but I definitely think they are trying to be, and they are, right, more cutting edge. We have to be as defenders a little bit more, I don't want to say slower, but more strategic in what we're doing because we don't want to open up additional holes or issues that we're not ready for, right? But to your point, AI has a huge upside on the defensive side, right? The most obvious and easiest example is in detection and response, right? As we layer AI, and to be fair, machine learning has been around in these types of tools for a long time, but now as we implement more advanced AI solutions and tools into things like detection and response, we can analyze millions of events in seconds, right? Which in the past would take days. So, and that can help us identify behavior that looks anomalous or suspicious or whatever, right? So absolutely AI is going to be helping us and is already helping us on the defensive side as well. But I do think that the attackers or the bad actors are definitely finding new and innovative ways, which are making it harder for us. And that's always been the case, as defenders are kind of on their heel. It's just the nature of what we do on their heels. And we need to think about what else can we be doing to get ahead of that curve, right? I don't think any cyber professional will say anyone or any organization is 100% safe. That's just not the world we live in, right? And AI has only kind of further proven and advanced that point. So we always want to think about how do we integrate new tools and technologies into helping defend ourselves. And again, that's happening already, but I think there's going to be more and more use cases coming up as we get deeper into this, AI, revolution.
I agree, and I think there's been more. I think it used to be, in my experience, there were attackers and defenders, but I also sense a bit of a shift in the field from, for example, how do you prevent breaches to, well, how do we assume a breach may happen and ensure we have resilience, we're not we can't recover our backups, et cetera. So do you think that is part of it too? And this shift has permeated organizations within the space. And in that sense, what does resilience mean in that context?
Yeah, that's a really important point, I think. I think the shift has happened in concept, right? People are thinking about, hey, it's not just about prevention. We have to think about how we get back up and running if something happens. But I don't think it's necessarily happened operationally for every company, right? And obviously, I'm generalizing here. I think everyone thinks about, oh, I have to assume that something could happen or may happen, but not everyone's actually operationalized what happens next, right? And how do I become resilient? And by that I mean getting back up and running, right, to a normal state. But even more importantly, is at least getting your critical operations, back up and running, right? I think every CISO and anyone that's overseeing this kind of area will agree that we have to plan for that, but not everyone has spent money on that, right? I think the majority of money, and this is still important, right, has been spent on preventative controls, right? And that's, of course, important. We don't want to get hit, right? We're not going to just open the doors and plan for resilience. So it is still important to spend a chunk of change on the preventative side. But what I think people haven't really thought about is the ratio of what are we spending on preventative versus actually, detection, response, and resilience, right? Because again, that is going to be just as important because none of us are 100% safe, right? Um, and some of that includes thinking about how do we change our mindset in terms of what are we doing, right? So again, in the past, and I didn't mention this before, but 20 years ago, 25 years ago, everything we thought about was perimeter defense, right? How do we protect the gates? How do we protect our fence? Make sure nothing can get in. That's not the world we live in nowadays, right? And the assumed breach thing that you mentioned ahead of time is exactly that, right? Is what if someone's already in our architecture? How do we, or in our network, how do we prevent that? So things like zero trust are really important, right? Not trusting anyone, having re-verification kind of happen, right? Investment in better detection and response capabilities, including things like AI that will actually help with that time, right? Because right now that days in environment is quite high. And actually testing some of those resilience plans, right? People love to put stuff on paper, but then won't actually test them and validate that, yeah, if something happens, this will work and we'll get back up and running in an hour or 2 hours or whatever your downtime is, right? And then lastly, kind of segmentation, right? Network segmentation has been around a long time. It's not just network segmentation. How do we limit the components of our environment to, as I like to say, like reduce the blast radius, right? If someone gets in here, they don't have access to everything. It's just this little piece that gets hit. So these are all things that are not, easy or cheap by any means, but it does highlight the importance of moving to a different type of mindset in terms of we're just trying to keep people out versus, hey, we know something could happen, and how do we actually manage that more proactively internally, right? With all the partners and contractors and consultants like me that people work with nowadays, it's not just your employees on the inside, right? And we have to think a little bit more differently about that. Of course, some organizations have done really great at that, but I think just generally talking to people, most people are still focused very heavily on the preventative side.
Yeah, and I think there's that also expanse where your DR in the context meets business continuity,
Yep.
and then you really get into org-wide efforts, right? So I've always wondered where business continuity will grow. Will that come more into this practice? Because a lot of times it's an important next step that does get overlooked or not given as much emphasis.
No, I would say there's just to your point, there's a really important overlap when people think about cyber and incident response versus true business continuity and disaster recovery, right? Because they are inherently linked. And I think I've seen this when I've done like tabletops and things like that with clients that, oh yeah, IRPs are over here and cyber does their own stuff and then we'll do something else. But that's not the case, right? And to your point, they are very quickly merging in a good way so that everyone's kind of aware of it's not just about a cyber incident, it's about anything and how does that all, kind of transverse through the broader environment.
Yeah, and related, I was interested in asking you about this. So we have operations in multiple countries, and I know you've worked across both North and South America, but also Europe, the Middle East, and APAC.
Yeah.
And in my experience, cyber threats, they do not respect borders or politics.
Yep.
But defenses try to do. So curious your experience with different regulatory regimes, maturity levels. What does the global picture of cyber look like? Is it what we're hearing, or is there more going on that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, exactly to your point. As much as we are increasingly interconnected, there's a lot of differences, by country or region, whatever you want to think about it, right? Of course, North America and the Americas for sure, or Americas and North America for sure, face, really the most sophisticated ecosystem, right? We see attacks from, of course, ransomware groups that operate out of different countries. We see true nation state attacks, right? Individuals, hacktivists are bigger in the US and other places, right? Things like that. Of course, financially motivated criminals. So I think, and you can see this in any ana sport, right? That North America specifically takes the brunt of it when it comes to volume and scale of these types of attacks. So I feel like we're always having to be as much as we can be, not that others aren't, right, on the forefront and thinking about how we actually defend ourselves. And the U.S., and I'll say this more broadly, right, doesn't have a very aggregated kind of regulatory landscape, right, outside of certain things like the SEC and certain industries. A lot of things are state by state, and that makes it fragmented. So on that same note, Europe, unlike that, is very much, you know, aligned in terms of how they put out regulation, and they're probably the most complex regulatory landscape that I can think about right now. Right, they've had GDPR example for a long time. Right, recently they have like the NIS2 Act, the DORA Act, now the EU AI Act. Right, so they are actually, I feel like, and the US tends to model a lot of what they do based off of that, but they tend to be ahead of the curve when it comes to actual regulatory work. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, sometimes that can create kind of compliance fatigue, right? Everyone's just really worried about, oh, I got to be compliant, which is important, of course, and then they don't actually be proactive, right? So while that's important, there's a balance that kind of has to be struck there, and again, not as easily done as we would hope. And then working in, I would say, APAC, I think that probably has the widest maturity gap of any region. And I say that at a regional level. I know, there's definitely some countries that are much more ahead of the curve, right? We think of South Korea and Japan, right? But especially like emerging economies, they have much bigger gaps, right? And to be fair, some of those aren't the ones that get hit with as much cyber issues. So that's why they may not have the same regulation and same proactive measures kind of built into how they think about it, unless they're a multinational. But that tends to be the region I think about that has the biggest kind of maturity gap across us, right? Now, if you think about, and I know obviously you work work globally as well, but some of the ones we work with, right? A global organization can have to navigate 100 plus different regulations, right? And that's not easy, right? Very complex, and it diverts resources to compliance rather than true security, which we talked about earlier, right? So, it's different across all the different regions, but if you are a multinational company, there is an ecosystem of regulation you kind of have to work through and figure out. And unfortunately, that just sometimes diverts the attention away from some of the more proactive stuff you may want to do, right? That may not be captured in some of those kind of laws. So it's not an easy answer, but I do think the U.S. and North America for sure is facing the brunt of it. But I always say we'll be the tip of the spear, and we'll help everyone else kind of figure out what to do when we think about new technologies, processes, tools, things like that. And I think that's been the case for most of the stuff that we've done so far.
Yeah, so far. But let's talk about the future and the talent coming up. And I say that as you've been involved in academic advisory roles at both Penn State and Ithaca College. And from what I understand, there's a significant talent shortage in cybersecurity globally. So does the way we're currently educating the next generation of cyber professionals, in your opinion, match what's needed right now? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it is definitely changing, and changing for the positive. I'm biased because I graduated from Penn State, but they have a really great program that they built out in about 25 years ago, 26 years ago now, right? That was actually built by consulting firms and other large firms to help get people into the workforce. That was 26 years ago. Now, and I work with a lot of other, not on their boards, but work with a lot of colleges and recruiting and stuff like that. So many of them have specific cyber programs, whether it's undergrad or graduate programs that actually are focused on getting more people in the workforce. And I think, as right, all these reports always say there's like 4 million plus jobs available globally in cyber. I don't know if that's exact number, but it's around there. So a lot of colleges have built out programs specifically for cybersecurity and now data science and AI as well, which is great. What I would say is when I do try to advise, colleges or anyone I even just talk to, right, about these programs, is it's important to have a balance of technical knowledge, but also broader organizational and risk understanding, right? If we have a number, all these individuals come out of college and all they can do are, is ethical hacking as an example, right? That's great. That's important, but we need more than that. So we need individuals to be broader and understand broader cyber risks than just maybe the hands-on, technical thing, right? So a lot of the colleges are adapting new programs that are not just theory and actually practical learning, right? Like I know many colleges do, case studies and capstone programs with other companies, right? Building the, excuse me, I know other colleges are constantly thinking about and changing and evolving the curriculum to adapt to new threats, right? Looking at true case studies, right? So really kind of get into the weeds and not just the theory, but also how we apply this or how is this applied to the real world, right? I think that's definitely changing. I would not say that we're there, but I have seen, especially since I graduated, 25 years ago into now, a big change in a positive way of what that, broader education looks like. And that I will say has helped a lot. Some of the candidates that we see coming out of college from some of these colleges that we target are great. I mean, they come in and they're able to work and understand the stuff we're doing pretty quickly and do not need as much of a investment aspect, right, in terms of uplifting them and getting them, ready to go. So that's been awesome. And I've definitely seen that shift, since I've joined. So I think we're going in the right direction, but, we're not quite there yet.
No, that's great. And here in Buffalo, we have nearby Tech Buffalo. And I think, STEM is very healthy. There's a lot of lucrative careers. What I see sometimes is the specialization. So I do try to encourage students, learn programming too, or, learn networking, because those skills really help technically to understand big picture. So speaking of AI,
Absolutely.
to close, I asked an AI to generate a closing question based on your background. So let's hear what it came up with. AI's name may be Claude. You spent 2 decades helping organizations navigate cyber risk, and now you're advising them on AI risk as a distinct discipline. If you had to make one prediction about how the relationship between AI and cybersecurity will look 5 years from now, what will it be?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And what I would say is the relationship between thinking about AI, versus cybersecurity will have dissolved, right? AI is going to be embedded, right, into everything we do and will just be part of the normal conversation, right? It's going to be a foundational tool that's built into, all the other tools that we use, right? It's not going to be a separate thing. And it's going to be part of everything we do, both on the, reactive side in terms of incident response and defensive stuff, but also on the offensive side as the threat actors are already doing, right? So it'll just kind of merge together is my view, right? Because again, we're already starting to see that as AI is being built into different platforms that we use, not just in cyber, but beyond. And we're already starting to see AI roles emerge, right, in organizations, right? AI security architects, chief AI officers, things like that. So again, I just think it's going to be built into the broader ecosystem of technology. If I want to put cyber under there, and another risk that's going to be just integrated into what we think about when we look at any solution, right, or any product that is going to be doing a function for us that has AI built into it.
So Ankur, this has been a great conversation. Where can people find you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Frank and the team. This is great. Again, I work at FTI Consulting. We're a public company, so LinkedIn is really the best place to start to learn about me or my team or the broader practice in terms of what we're doing. We are constantly posting about cyber trends and cyber threats. So if you follow us, you'll get updates on all this kinds of stuff. We put out, threat alerts all the time to help people stay up to date on recent things that are happening, like the Iran escalation, like Mythos, things like that. So you can go to fticonsulting.com/services/cybersecurity, and you can find us there and find my name and reach out if you have any questions. We're always happy. I always say, I know obviously we're in consulting and obviously we have to, do things to be commercially viable, but I'm always happy to have a conversation. I think education is the number one thing we all need to be thinking about and doing. So happy to have just a conversation about this and help you think about what you can be doing or what you should be thinking about in the future for yourself or your organization. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.